Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome to Saturday Grove. I'm just going to sit here and whittle on and chat about things magical and things mystical, and just my own take on thing after 40 odd years of exploring the magical and the mystical. Um, there's a there's a phrase that's been going round in my head quite a bit this week. I'm not sure I've picked it up, but transform the person who will act. Transform the person who will act. Not transform the situation, not transform another person, not even initially transform the world, but transform the person who will act. And the more I've sat with it, the more I think there's something possibly rather important kind of hidden inside that idea. Because most of the time, when we want something to change, we begin by asking what we should do. What action should I take? What words should I say? What ritual should I perform? What spell should I cast? What decision should I make? What technique should I use? And I mean, they're perfectly sensible questions, and I'm not suggesting we all stop doing things and sit around waiting to become luminous beings before we put the bins out. But I've noticed over the years that the same action formed by two different people, or even by the same person in two different states, can produce completely different results. The words may be identical, the gestures may be identical, the ritual may be identical, but the person doing it is not. And I think that changes everything. You can walk into a room feeling nervous, defensive, and convinced that everybody's judging you, and the room seems to respond accordingly. People appear distant, faces look disapproving, every silence becomes evidence that you've said the wrong thing. Alternatively, you can walk into exactly the same room feeling settled, interested, and open, and suddenly people seem warmer. The room feels different, and you notice different expressions. You hear different tones of voice. Now, that room may not have changed at all, but your relationship with it has. And because your relationship with it has changed, the way you behave changes. Your posture changes, your voice changes, the timing of your words. Your timing of your words changes. Did I mention that this is just done in one take and whatever comes out comes out? So if I stumble over my words, then I do apologize. Um, I don't actually. I'm running on a train of whatever flowing through my brain. It comes out as it comes out. Um, the way you look at people changes, and of course they then respond to those changes. But that whole thing begins with the person who entered the room. And I think this is something that the old magical practices understood very well. Before the magician performs the operation, there's the preparation. Sometimes an enormous amount of preparation. Washing, fasting, prayer, silence, special clothes, certain words, repeated over several days, tools made carefully, times chosen, places prepared. It's a lot. It's a lot. The mind repeatedly gets brought back to the purpose of the work. And yes, it can seem wonderfully excessive. You begin reading some old instructions and think, right, I need a particular branch cut from a particular tree at sunrise on a particular day, using a knife that's never been used for anything else, whilst facing east and saying several pages of words in a language I don't actually understand. And by the time you've done all that, you've kind of forgotten why you wanted the branch in the first place. But beneath all the complications, there is a principle. The magician who begins the preparation is not meant to be the same person who eventually performs the act. Something is being changed. Attention is being gathered. Ordinary habits, they're kind of being interrupted. And the mind is being turned repeatedly towards one purpose. And the body is being involved. The imagination's being involved. Expectation is being built. And the operator is just being moved out of the casual everyday state in which we wander around thinking, what shall I have for tea? Whether we've remembered to reply to a message or not, why the dog's staring at the corner of the room again. I haven't got a dog, but if I did, I'm sure it'd be staring at the corner of the room again. They're being prepared to act for somewhere else. And that somewhere else isn't necessarily just like a supernatural place. It's somewhere deeper, it's somewhere more coherent, somewhere, somewhere where the whole of yourself is involved in what you're about to do. Transform the person who will act. Because I think an action performed casually is a casual action. An action performed fearfully carries fear into it. An action performed whilst divided against yourself carries that division. It's why in some of the earliest magical groups I was ever part on, you weren't allowed in if you were having any sort of physical or mental issues at the time, because you're carrying that into the magical space and it can get amplified. You don't need that. You don't want that. I've seen it happen. Um, so division, things, always leave the outside, leave your everyday stuff outside, leave discussions, arguments, stuff outside when you're working magic, because it can be brought in and it taints the work, it taints the energy. You can light a candle for courage whilst quietly rehearsing all the reasons you're going to fail. You can perform a ritual for prosperity whilst you're remaining ashamed of wanting money. You can ask for love whilst being convinced that nobody would ever genuinely love someone like you. We can seek protection whilst imagining that the danger is there around every corner, and that intensity, that danger becomes most vivid thing in the room. And we wonder why the actions feel weak. Perhaps, maybe, the action was never the problem. Perhaps the person performing it has not yet become capable of carrying it. Now, I appreciate that may sound a little harsh, but I don't mean it as criticism. I've done it countless times. I've gone through the outward form whilst inwardly remaining exactly where I was. I've said the words without becoming the person who could mean them. I've made decisions from a state of panic and then been surprised when the decisions contained, oh, panic. I've attempted to create change whilst I cling tightly to the identity that created the problem. And that's a strange thing that we human beings do. We want the world to change so we can feel different. But very often, the world is kind of waiting for us to feel different so that we can meet it differently. Not because everything's in our heads, not because every misfortune is something we've secretly created, and certainly not because we can simply smile at every difficulty until it becomes a rainbow. But it's because we are participants in what happens. We're not standing outside of life pressing buttons. The person we bring into our magic, into the moment, becomes part of the moment. There are places where this becomes really obvious. You can leave a busy road, step through a gap in a hedge, and enter an old woodlands. Nothing dramatic happens. No flashes of light, no choir of invisible voices, no elderly stranger appearing from behind an oak tree to inform you that you are the chosen one. There's probably just mud, brambles, and nettles. And there's usually some sort of judgmental pheasant, I always find. Anyway, but as we walk further in, something begins to alter. Our pace changes. Your hearing opens. You begin noticing small movements, a branch shifting, somewhere there's some water nearby, the changing texture of the ground. The space does something to you. And you're always allowing yourself to be changed by that space. The road self gradually becomes the woodland self. The person who entered is not quite the person now listening beneath the trees. And that's probably why thresholds have always mattered. The edge of the woods, the gate, the doorway, the riverbank, the shore, the moment just before sunrise, the place where one thing becomes another. A threshold doesn't merely mark a change in location, it gives us an opportunity to change who's crossing it. You can step over a threshold absent-mindedly and carry the whole of the old world with you. It's like you've just walked 100 miles with the biggest rucksack and someone offers to take it off you and you carry on carrying it anyway. Alternatively, you can pause. Take a breath, feel your feet, look at what you are entering, and allow the crossing to mean something. The place beyond the threshold may then meet a slightly different person. And this is why even the simplest ritual can be powerful. Not because the universe requires theatre, but because we often do. We need some way of letting the body know that something's going to change, something's happening. This is a something, it's going to be different. I'm going to be different. We can understand an idea intellectually and remain completely untouched by it. But wash your hands slowly before beginning. Change the lighting. Stand differently. Speak aloud. Hold objects that represent what you're doing. Step deliberately from one place into another. Do this consciously, and suddenly the idea enters the body. The nervous system begins to understand. The imagination wakes up, and the act becomes real. And I think there's something else here. When we imagine ourselves doing something, we usually imagine it from the position of the person we are now. So if I'm frightened of having a difficult conversation, I imagine frightened me having that conversation. And unsurprisingly, the conversation looks blooming awful. I see myself struggling, I hear my voice wavering, I imagine the other person responding badly, and then I say, oh, that confirms it. This is going to be awful. But I've only rehearsed the current version of myself. I haven't yet asked who needs to have the conversation. Not which other person, which other version of me. What happens if, before imagining the conversation, I remember what it feels like to be calm? Not pretend to be calm. I remember it. There have been moments, we've all had moments, maybe sitting somewhere quietly, maybe after I've done a good performance, I settle, perhaps during a walk, perhaps when I've been helping somebody else with a problem that looks enormous to them but seemed perfectly manageable. All experienced more inner states than we normally remember. Confidence is not a foreign substance that some people possess and others don't. It's something most of us have experienced in particular places, doing particular things. And if nothing else, you ask somebody who says they're not confident if they're confident about that. And they are, which means they're confident. Calm exists somewhere in our history. Courage exists somewhere in our history. Curiosity exists somewhere, even if only briefly. And when we remember one of those moments properly, not just think about it, but remember how we were standing, breathing, the sensations, the sounds, the way the world looked from inside it, we begin to bring that person back. Then imagine the conversation. It becomes a different conversation because a different person is having it. That to me, it's shape shifting in its purest form. Not turning into a wolf or a raven. Yeah, I transformed into a wolf for my interview. How did it go? Well, they told me to leave once I'd finished weeing up the side of the lamppost. I barked at the security man. I howled at the managing director. Definitely makes for a different staff meeting. Certainly makes it more interesting. It's the deliberate movement from one expression of ourselves into another that matters. And I don't think that means becoming false. We often imagine that the anxious version is the real one and the confident version is somehow an act. But why should fear have a greater claim to authenticity than courage? Why should hesitation be regarded as honest whilst confidence is pretending? Both are part of us. Both are possible ways of organizing our attention, our body, our memory, and our relationship with the world. So the question's not which one of is the real me. The question is which one's needed now? You know, do I need the anxious me now, or do I need the confident me now? Which one is needed here? And perhaps an even deeper question, which one serves what I'm about to do? The person required to comfort a frightened child is not the same arrangement of self required to stand on a stage. And the person required to listen deeply is not the same arrangement required to confront injustice. The person to create is not always the person required to edit. And the person required to begin is not necessarily the person required to finish. Yet one of our difficulties is that we keep trying to perform every task from the same state. Then we conclude, when it doesn't quite go as we hoped, that we're incapable. Can't do magic, can't do this, can't do that. Perhaps we're not incapable. Perhaps we've simply brought the wrong self to the table. And this is where preparation stops being a tiresome delay before the real activity. Preparation becomes the first part of the activity. The musician tuning the instrument has already begun the performance. The storyteller becoming quiet before speaking has already begun the story. The magician cleaning the space has already begun the magic. The research that's gone into it, the planning, is all part of the magic. The person pausing, there's so many P's in my blah, blah, blah. The person performing, no, oh, it's been a long week. The person pausing before answering in anger has always begun has already begun to change the conversation. The act does not begin when the hand moves. It begins when the person who will move the hand is formed. Transform the person who will act. This principle also comes with a warning, though, because transformation's not always towards something wise. We transform ourselves constantly without noticing. We watch the news for an hour and become a person prepared to see threat. We scroll through arguments and become a person prepared to fight. We repeatedly tell an old story about what somebody did to us and become the person to whom it's still happening. And we enter imaginary conversations, win imaginary arguments, deliver devastating imaginary speeches, and then carry that combative person into the kitchen where somebody innocently asks whether we've seen the scissors. We prepare ourselves all the time. So the question is whether we're doing it consciously. What are you repeatedly looking at? What are you rehearsing? What are you saying to yourself? What posture are you holding? What emotion are you practicing? What identity are you strengthening? Because every repetition is a small act of becoming. Every time we tell ourselves, I'm no good at this, we're not merely describing something, we're rehearsing a person. Every time we say, this always goes wrong, we're preparing someone to recognize failure quickly. Every time we imagine humiliation before an event, we're training the body for an event that has not yet occurred, which is a form of magic too. It's just not usually very helpful magic. We're placing ourselves under enchantment because the spell is spoken in our own voice, so we seldom notice it. Perhaps the work is not, I don't know, always to add something new. Sometimes it's to break the old preparation, to interrupt the rehearsal, to stop midway through the familiar sentence. You know, this always, does it? Does it really? I never. People like me. Which people? Which me? Chatted to somebody the other day and I always spill coffee down me. I'm like, always? Wow. It's quite a thing you've trained yourself to do there. Always spilling coffee. Wow. When did you last have a coffee? About an hour ago. Okay. Did you spill it down you? No. Okay. Have you spilled any down you today? No. What about that? What about yesterday? No, actually. Okay. But I went to a cafe the other day. Okay, I went to a cafe the other day. Did you spill coffee down you? Oh, actually, no, I went to a cafe, but you didn't. So when you say, I always spill coffee down me, it's 3 days now where you haven't. So it can't be always, can it? Be careful the spells you cast, my friends. There's often a tiny opening when the old statement falters. And in that opening, another version of the person becomes possible. Not a perfect person, not an invulnerable person, not one of those insufferable people who leap out of bed at 5 in the morning, drink something green, and announce that they've already completed 12 life goals before most of us have located our trousers. Um, I mean, I have to get up at 5, but there's definitely nothing green or any sort of leaping evolved. Um, yeah, you know, I can usually find my trousers though. Um, you know, what emerges in that moment, it doesn't, in that gap, is just a person organized differently enough to take the next step. And that's important. We don't always need to transform into the final version of ourselves. It's a journey, friends. We only need to become the person capable of the next action. And then perhaps that action transforms us again. And courage is not always something we possess before acting. Sometimes we become courageous because we acted whilst carrying just enough courage to begin. The path, the path forms the walker. The craft forms the craftsperson. The practice forms the practitioner. We, you and I, transform the person who will act, and then the act continues the transformation. It becomes a circle. Actually, maybe a spiral, because we never return quite to the same place. It's always baffled me with guided meditations and path workings. We're going to take you on this path working. It's going to transform you. So we're going to create this space in your mind where you set off from. And you'll go on this journey through all these symbols we've decided you need to see. And then we'll bring you back to exactly the same place you started. Think about that metaphorically on the inner level. I've gone on a journey, but I've ended up back where I started. That to me makes no sense. Take someone on a path working, take them on a journey, take yourself on a path working on a journey. End up somewhere else. Do the journey for its purpose and end up somewhere else. Because if you end up back where you were, that journey is pointless. You might as well watch telly or add a coffee, making sure you didn't spill it on yourself. So how do we do it? I don't think there's one method, but there's a question we can carry. I like questions. Questions have great magic if they're the right questions. Before something important, instead of asking, what should I do? Ask, who needs to do it? What quality needs to be present? How would that me breathe? How would they stand? How would they be paying attention? What would they remember? What would they no longer be rehearsing? What would they believe was possible? Not forever, not as a grand philosophy, but for the next few minutes to get the job done. And then give yourself a little time to become them. Perhaps through silence, through movement, perhaps through a piece of music. I remember once being at an event, like a holistic event in Shrewsbury, and a lady came up to me and said, "Would you mind speaking to my daughter? She's very nervous and gets a lot of anxiety, and so much so she couldn't come up to you." So she came up to me. I went and spoke to her, asked her about this, and she said, yeah, it was pretty. She'd not got jobs because of it and everything. It was really affecting her life. And I was okay. So can you think about how you want to be? That person you want to be. Yeah. I want you to look at this field. We're in the, where is it? Park. Look at the park. That you that can get the job, that you that's confident, that you that can go out and find a boyfriend. Where in this field was that person standing? I said, I don't need to know. Just tell me when you know where they're standing. So she did. I said, now I want you to walk up and step into the place of that confident person. And so she set off across the grass. And as she got closer to the point, she went from being all hunched over to slowly standing up more upright. Her stride becomes stronger. And she stood into that space and she turned around and she was beaming. I mean, it was further than I thought it would be, so I had to run across the field to catch up with her. When I got there, I said, now you've got a choice. You can go back to that person over there. That's the same as starting a path working from the beginning, by the way, ending up where you started. Um, or you can choose to be this person now. And 2 weeks later, I got a message from her mom saying that she'd just got the job that she'd just recently put in for. Result. A kind of magic. So, ask those questions and then give yourself that time and space. Might be that you wash your hands and face. Perhaps you step outside. Perhaps you go looking for that you and find that spot. I remember doing workshops with people and shamanic stuff and finding our power spots. Well, what if there's that spot out there where the you need to be for the next week is waiting? Go find them. Don't carry on listening to this. Go no, carry on listening to this, but then go find them. Perhaps there's an object you can hold that reminds you of who you've been before. Perhaps by saying a few words aloud, perhaps by calling to mind the people, places, ancestors, teachers, and unseen companions whose presence help you stand more fully in yourself. Perhaps by remembering that the strength you need does not have to be manufactured from anything. You are part of something larger than the frightened little voice that claims to be the whole of you. Life is moving through you. The same life that pushes roots through stones, brings leaves back after winter, and teaches rivers how to find the sea. You do not have to create all your strength. Sometimes you only have to stop getting in the way of it, to become quiet enough for it to rise and then act. Not because every fear has vanished, not because you've achieved spiritual perfection. God help you if you ever do that. But because the person now standing there is capable of carrying the act. I think that may be the spell before every spell. Before the words, before the gestures, before the candle's lit, before the decision is made, before the door is opened. There is the shaping of the person who will do it. Perhaps the deepest magic is not forcing reality to obey us. Perhaps it's becoming someone through whom a different reality can begin to emerge. Transform the person who will act, and then let that person act. And I think I'll stop there. I think I'll stop there for today. I like that. I'm going to write that down and have it on my board up there for the next week or so. Transform the person who will act, and then let that person act. Beautiful. Anyway, I've been Rob. This has been the Saturday Grove. I hope you've enjoyed our little meanderings today. Remember, if you've not subscribed already, do. Once we get to 100, I'm going to start doing some live things on the channel. Maybe even live Saturday Groves. But it would be great to have hit that 100 people target. So, if you've got friends who think, oh, Dave will like this, let Dave know about it. All right. Much love, many blessings, and I will see you again next week for the Saturday Grove. And don't forget, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I put a little short out with a few thoughts just to carry you through the week. Take care. Have a good one. Bye bye.